On the evening of September 12th, 2021, Rachel Brenneman stood at the kitchen window of her modest farmhouse in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, watching the sun dip behind the Stoltzfus family's barn across the field. Her husband David, a 41-year-old insurance adjuster for Nationwide, was upstairs packing for a 3-day conference in Pittsburgh. Their 2 children, ages 8 and 11, were finishing homework at the dining room table. To anyone observing the Brenneman household that evening, everything appeared ordinary. But what David didn't know was that for the past 7 months, his wife had been engaged in a relationship that would unravel their 13-year marriage and destroy the carefully maintained boundaries of their conservative rural community. Rachel Brenneman was 38 years old. She had worked part-time as a billing coordinator at a veterinary clinic in Strasbourg since 2015. Co-workers described her as friendly but reserved, someone who rarely discussed her personal life. She and David had met in college at Penn State, married in 2008, and settled in Lancaster County to raise their family in a quiet agricultural area surrounded by Amish farms. Their home, a 2-story white clapboard structure with green shutters, sat on 3 acres of leased land at the end of Harvest Lane. David's work required frequent travel, leaving Rachel alone with the children for extended periods. Neighbors later told investigators that the Brennamans seemed like a typical suburban family transplanted to the countryside, cordial but not particularly social. Directly across the road, approximately 200 yards from the Brenneman property, lived the Stoltzfus family. Isaac Stoltzfus, age 52, was a dairy farmer and carpenter who maintained a traditional Old Order Amish household with his wife Miriam and their 6 children. The youngest, Samuel Stoltzfus, was 22 years old. Samuel had completed his formal schooling at age 14, as was customary in his community, and had spent the intervening years working alongside his father in carpentry and farm labor. According to members of the Amish community interviewed later, Samuel was known as hardworking and obedient, though some described him as more curious about the outside world than his older siblings. He had not yet been baptized into the church, a decision that allowed him a degree of personal freedom uncommon among his peers. The relationship between Rachel Brenneman and Samuel Stoltzfus began in February 21. According to digital records later obtained by investigators, the initial contact occurred when Rachel hired Isaac Stoltzfus to repair a collapsing section of her back porch. Samuel accompanied his father to the job site and worked on the project over the course of 4 days. Witnesses from the veterinary clinic where Rachel worked recalled her mentioning the repairs and commenting that the younger Amish worker was polite and surprisingly talkative. What began as brief conversations during work breaks evolved into longer exchanges. Cell tower records indicate that Rachel began driving past the Stoltzfus farm multiple times per week, often parking her silver Honda CR-V near the property line, under the pretense of admiring the landscape or checking on the porch repairs even after they were completed. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. By late March 21, the interactions had progressed beyond casual conversation. Samuel did not own a cell phone, consistent with his community's restrictions on technology, but he had access to a shared phone kept in his father's carpentry workshop for business purposes. Text message logs recovered during the investigation revealed that Rachel initiated contact by leaving handwritten notes in a mailbox positioned at the edge of the Stoltzfus property. These notes, several of which were later entered into evidence, contained requests to meet privately. Samuel responded by using the workshop phone to send brief messages, arranging times when his family would be occupied elsewhere. Their meetings occurred primarily in 2 locations. The first was a secluded section of wooded area bordering both properties, accessible by a dirt path used for farm equipment. The second was Rachel's home during weekday afternoons when her children were at school and David was traveling for work. According to testimony provided by a postal worker who serviced the rural route, Rachel's vehicle was observed parked in her driveway on multiple occasions during work hours, despite her employment schedule indicating she should have been at the clinic. When questioned by her supervisor about repeated absences, Rachel cited medical appointments and family obligations. During this period, Rachel began purchasing items that did not align with her household needs. Bank records show transactions at a general store in Intercourse, Pennsylvania, where she bought men's work clothing in sizes consistent with Samuel's build. She also purchased prepaid phone cards, which investigators later determined were used to facilitate communication when the workshop phone was unavailable. In text exchanges recovered from the shared workshop phone, Rachel referred to Samuel as S and used coded language to arrange meetings. In one message dated June 4, 21, she wrote, "Tomorrow at 2, bring the hammer." Investigators interpreted this as a reference to Samuel arriving under the guise of performing carpentry work. The secrecy surrounding the relationship intensified as summer approached. Samuel's behavior, according to statements from his siblings, became noticeably different. He volunteered for tasks that took him away from the family farm, spent less time at communal meals, and exhibited signs of distraction during work. His father, Isaac, confronted him in early July after discovering that tools were missing from the workshop and that Samuel had been seen walking toward the Brenneman property on multiple occasions. Samuel denied any wrongdoing and claimed he was simply helping a neighbor. Isaac, however, grew suspicious and began monitoring his son's movements more closely. Rachel's marriage to David also showed signs of strain. Friends of the couple later reported that Rachel seemed distant and preoccupied during social gatherings. David confided in a coworker that Rachel had become irritable and dismissive when he suggested family activities. He attributed the tension to stress from her job and the demands of raising 2 children. What he did not realize was that Rachel had begun discussing plans to leave the marriage. In messages recovered from the workshop phone, Rachel wrote to Samuel about finding a place where they could be together without judgment. She mentioned selling the house and moving to a location far from Lancaster County. Samuel's responses were brief and non-committal, often consisting of single-word replies or questions about when they could meet next. By late August 21, Rachel's behavior became more erratic. Co-workers at the veterinary clinic noted that she arrived late, appeared disheveled, and made frequent personal calls during shifts. Her supervisor issued a formal warning on August 18th, citing performance issues and unexplained absences. Bank statements show that Rachel withdrew $300 in cash over a 2-week period, transactions that were inconsistent with the family's typical spending patterns. When David questioned her about the withdrawals, Rachel claimed she was purchasing supplies for a home renovation project. No such project was ever initiated. The situation reached a critical point on September 10, 21. According to witness statements, Miriam Stoltzfus discovered a folded piece of paper in the pocket of Samuel's work trousers while preparing laundry. The note, written in Rachel's handwriting, contained explicit language and a request to meet that evening. Miriam immediately informed her husband. Isaac confronted Samuel in the barn later that day. Samuel admitted to the relationship but insisted it was not serious and that Rachel had been the one to initiate contact. Isaac, acting in accordance with the expectations of his community, informed Samuel that he was forbidden from having any further contact with Rachel Brenneman. He also made the decision to speak directly with David Brenneman, believing it was his responsibility to inform the other household of the situation. On the evening of September 11th, Isaac Stoltzfus walked across the road to the Brenneman residence. David answered the door. According to David's later statement to police, Isaac explained, in plain terms, that his son had been involved with Rachel and that the matter needed to be addressed immediately. David, stunned, asked Isaac to repeat himself. Isaac provided details, including the timeline and the discovery of the note. David thanked him for coming forward and closed the door. Inside, David confronted Rachel in the kitchen. Their argument, overheard by neighbors due to raised voices, lasted over an hour. Rachel denied the affair initially, then admitted to meeting with Samuel, but minimized the extent of the relationship. David demanded she end all contact immediately. Rachel agreed, though her tone, according to David's recollection, was defensive rather than apologetic. The following day, September 12th, David prepared to leave for his scheduled conference in Pittsburgh. Before departing, he reiterated to Rachel that the matter was not resolved and that they would discuss next steps upon his return. Rachel nodded but said little. David left the house at approximately 7:30 a.m. Security footage from a gas station on Route 30 confirmed his vehicle heading west toward the interstate shortly afterward. What happened next was reconstructed through a combination of digital evidence, witness statements, and forensic analysis. At approximately 10:15 a.m., Rachel sent a text message to the workshop phone. The message read, "Need to see you. This is the last time. Please." Samuel, who was working in the barn, saw the message on the shared phone. He did not respond immediately. At 11 o'clock a.m., Rachel sent a second message that stated she was home alone and asked him to come immediately. Samuel left the barn without informing his father. A neighbor driving past the Stoltzfus farm later reported seeing a young Amish man walking quickly along Harvest Lane toward the Brenneman property. Samuel arrived at Rachel's home at approximately 11:20 a.m. Rachel's vehicle was parked in the driveway, and the front door was unlocked. Investigators later determined that Rachel had sent her children to spend the day with her sister in Ephrata, citing a personal matter she needed to handle. Phone records confirmed a call to her sister at 9:45 a.m., during which Rachel asked if the children could stay overnight. Her sister agreed without question. Inside the house, the interaction between Rachel and Samuel escalated rapidly. According to forensic evidence and Samuel's subsequent testimony, the two argued in the living room. Rachel, according to Samuel's account, told him that they needed to leave Lancaster County together immediately. She claimed that David would try to keep her from seeing Samuel and that the community would ostracize them both if they stayed. Samuel resisted, stating that he could not abandon his family or his obligations. Rachel became emotional, alternating between pleading and anger. Samuel later stated that she kept insisting they had no choice, and that it was now or never. The argument moved to the kitchen. At approximately 12:10 p.m., Rachel retrieved a bottle of prescription medication from a cabinet above the sink. The medication, lorazepam prescribed for anxiety, had been filled 2 weeks earlier. Rachel told Samuel she would take the entire bottle if he left her. Samuel attempted to take the bottle from her hand. During the struggle, Rachel fell backward, striking her head on the corner of the kitchen island. The impact was severe. Samuel later described hearing a sound he compared to a wooden board cracking. Rachel collapsed onto the tile floor. Blood pooled beneath her head from a laceration consistent with blunt force trauma. Samuel knelt beside her and attempted to rouse her by calling her name and shaking her shoulders. There was no response. Panicking, Samuel stood and paced the kitchen for several minutes. He later admitted that his first instinct was to run, but he did not. Instead, at 12:22 p.m., he used Rachel's cell phone, which was lying on the counter, to dial 911. The call was recorded and later entered into evidence. The dispatcher answered, and Samuel identified himself, stating his name and location. He said there had been an accident and that Rachel was not moving. The dispatcher asked him to confirm the address and inquired whether Rachel was breathing. Samuel said he didn't know. The dispatcher instructed him to check for a pulse. Samuel placed the phone down, and the sound of movement was audible on the recording. When he returned to the phone, he said he could not feel anything. The dispatcher told him to stay on the line and that help was on the way. Emergency medical personnel from Lancaster County EMS arrived at the Brenneman residence at 12:31 p.m. They found Samuel sitting on the front porch steps, visibly shaken. Inside, Rachel Brenneman was lying unresponsive on the kitchen floor. Paramedics assessed her condition and determined that she had sustained a significant head injury. She was transported to Lancaster General Hospital, where she was pronounced dead at 1:47 p.m. The cause of death was later identified as a subdural hematoma resulting from blunt force trauma to the skull. Pennsylvania State Police were notified and dispatched investigators to the scene. Trooper Linda Castellano, a senior investigator with the Criminal Investigation Unit, was assigned as lead. Upon arrival, Trooper Castellano secured the residence and initiated a preliminary walkthrough. The kitchen showed signs of a struggle, including an overturned chair, scattered prescription pills, and a small blood pool near the island. No weapons were observed. Samuel Stoltzfus, still seated on the porch, was transported to the barracks for questioning. During the initial interview, Samuel provided a detailed account of the events. He admitted to the relationship with Rachel, the argument, the physical struggle over the medication, and her fall. He repeatedly stated that he did not intend to harm her and that the injury was accidental. Investigators noted that Samuel appeared cooperative but emotionally distressed. His clothing bore small bloodstains consistent with his description of kneeling beside Rachel after her fall. Forensic technicians processed the scene over the following 48 hours. Blood spatter analysis confirmed that the primary bleeding occurred in a localized area near the kitchen island, consistent with a fall rather than an assault. The injury pattern on Rachel's skull matched the pointed corner of the granite countertop. No additional injuries were found on her body. Toxicology results indicated the presence of lorazepam in her system, but the levels were within therapeutic range, suggesting she had not ingested the medication during the altercation. Digital forensics played a central role in the investigation. Rachel's phone revealed the full scope of her communications with Samuel, including the messages sent on the morning of her death. Text threads with friends and family members painted a picture of a woman experiencing significant emotional turmoil. In one exchange with a former college roommate, Rachel wrote that she felt trapped in a life she did not choose. The roommate later told investigators that Rachel had seemed unhappy for years, but never mentioned Samuel or any affair. Investigators also interviewed David Brenneman, who had been contacted in Pittsburgh and returned immediately upon learning of Rachel's death. David provided his account of Isaac Stoltzfus's visit and the confrontation with Rachel. He stated that while he was angry, he had no reason to believe Rachel was in immediate danger. When asked whether he thought Samuel posed a threat, David said he thought the matter was over and that Rachel was going to end the relationship. If you've been following along, let me know in the comments. Do you think Samuel acted in self-defense, or should he have done something differently? Hit the like button if you're still with me. The case against Samuel Stoltzfus was presented to a grand jury in early October 2021. Prosecutors faced a complex decision. The evidence supported Samuel's account that Rachel's death was accidental, but questions remained about his actions immediately following the fall. The delay in calling 911, though brief, raised concerns. Additionally, the circumstances of the relationship, including Rachel's age and Samuel's relative inexperience, became points of discussion. Ultimately, the grand jury declined to indict Samuel on charges of homicide. However, he was charged with involuntary manslaughter and reckless endangerment. Prosecutors argued that Samuel's decision to engage in a physical struggle over the medication demonstrated reckless behavior that directly contributed to Rachel's death. The charges reflected the prosecution's belief that while Samuel did not intend to kill Rachel, his actions created an unreasonable risk of harm. The trial commenced in January 2022 at the Lancaster County Courthouse. The proceedings drew significant media attention due to the involvement of an Amish defendant and the circumstances of the affair. Samuel, represented by a public defender experienced in cases involving the Amish community, entered a plea of not guilty. During opening statements, the prosecution outlined their theory. Rachel Brenneman, desperate and emotionally unstable, threatened self-harm. Samuel Stoltzfus, rather than de-escalating the situation or immediately seeking help, engaged in a physical struggle that resulted in her fatal injury. They emphasized that a reasonable person in Samuel's position would have recognized the danger and acted differently. The defense countered by arguing that Samuel had acted out of genuine concern for Rachel's safety. They portrayed the struggle over the medication as an attempt to prevent her from harming herself. The fall, they argued, was a tragic accident that occurred in the course of trying to help. They also highlighted Samuel's immediate call to 911 as evidence of his lack of criminal intent. Medical experts testified for both sides. The prosecution's expert, a forensic pathologist, confirmed that the injury was consistent with a fall, but noted that the force required to cause such damage suggested significant momentum or struggle. The defense's expert, a biomechanics specialist, testified that the granite corner of the island was an especially dangerous surface, and that even a minor fall could result in serious injury. Samuel took the stand in his own defense. He appeared uncomfortable but answered questions directly. He described his upbringing, his limited exposure to relationships outside his community, and his confusion about the nature of his involvement with Rachel. When asked why he did not leave when Rachel threatened to harm herself, Samuel said he did not know what else to do and thought that if he could get the pills away from her, she would calm down. Under cross-examination, prosecutors pressed Samuel on the timeline. They asked why he paced the kitchen for several minutes before calling for help. Samuel stated that he was in shock and did not fully understand what had happened. They also questioned his decision to use Rachel's phone rather than running to a neighbor's house. Samuel responded that he did not think to do so, and that calling 911 seemed like the fastest option. Character witnesses were called on Samuel's behalf. Members of the Amish community, including his father Isaac and a church elder, testified that Samuel was known for his gentle demeanor and had never been involved in violence. Isaac stated plainly that his son made a mistake in judgment, but was not a violent person. Rachel's sister, who had cared for the children on the day of the incident, provided emotional testimony. She described Rachel as a loving mother who had struggled with feelings of isolation and dissatisfaction. She stated that Rachel never mentioned Samuel by name, but had confided that she felt overlooked in her marriage. The sister broke down while recounting the moment she learned of Rachel's death. The jury deliberated for 2 days. They returned a verdict of guilty on the charge of involuntary manslaughter and not guilty on the charge of reckless endangerment. The decision reflected their conclusion that while Samuel's actions contributed to Rachel's death, the circumstances did not rise to the level of recklessness required for the second charge. Sentencing took place in March 22. The judge acknowledged the unusual nature of the case and the lack of prior criminal history. Samuel was sentenced to 3 to 6 years in state prison, with eligibility for parole after serving the minimum term. The judge stated that this was a tragedy born of poor decisions on both sides and that a life was lost while another was forever altered. Samuel Stoltzfus is currently incarcerated at a facility in central Pennsylvania. According to public records, he has participated in educational programs and maintained contact with his family through written correspondence, as phone calls are discouraged within his community. David Brenneman sold the property on Harvest Lane in late 2022 and relocated with his children to a suburb outside Philadelphia. In a statement released through his attorney, David said his children lost their mother and he lost his wife, emphasizing that what happened that day did not have to happen. The Stoltzfus family continues to farm their land in Lancaster County. Isaac Stoltzfus declined all media requests but issued a brief statement through the church elder, expressing forgiveness while acknowledging that forgiveness does not erase the pain. This case remains a stark reminder of how secrecy, emotional desperation, and a single moment of poor judgment can converge into irreversible tragedy. Rachel Brenneman sought escape from a life she found confining, and Samuel Stoltzfus became entangled in something he was unprepared to navigate. In the end, both paid an unimaginable price. Thank you for watching. If you found this story compelling, please like and subscribe for more cases like this.